Greetings, colleagues and friends. Kambria Evans here, the Teaching and Learning EMDR consultant. And y'all, today we're going to talk about adaptations. Why is this important to talk about adaptations? Well, first of all, we need to understand what the hell adaptations even are. So we've talked about this as we're rebranding trauma therapy. We're thinking about what does treatment look like, right? How do we talk about treatment? How do we go through treatment? As the client, how do we advocate for what we deserve for effective, efficient care? And when we think about adaptations, what we're talking about is what we decided to do in response to something that was happening, something we decided or learned. We created an adaptation in response to get through it. Now, we do this all the time. We do this all the time, right? And what's really amazing to me is that when I get to meet somebody in the first or second session of EMDR therapy, I'm immediately looking for how do I get to meet their adaptations, right? Because I want to meet them. I want to understand not so much about the content of what happened to them that was traumatic. If they want to tell me, I'll listen. But I want to understand, what did you learn or decide from that experience about yourself, about others? And then what did you come up with as a way to help yourself in a good enough way, right? So I'm always looking for people's adaptations. And sometimes they can look like things that are really subtle. We talk a lot about, perfectionism, right? But what is the function of perfectionism? Typically, perfectionism was an adaptation created early in life and reinforced often, right? If I'm perfect, I'm safe. If I'm perfect, I belong and I am attached to my caregiver, right? If I'm perfect, this person will not get upset with me and yell at me and disconnect from me, okay? Everything that we do has been informed by something else. It's kind of amazing. And I believe that everything we do has a positive intention attached to it, right? Even people that describe adaptations as addictions, right? And some of y'all are going to have a lot to say about what I'm about to say, and that's okay. I want us to have a conversation. But therapists that label things as addictions or compulsions, like sex, drinking, drugs, shopping, gambling, working, I'm a workaholic, like all of these things could be called addictions or compulsions, but they're adaptations, right? I mean, very few people come out of the womb and they're like, I am gonna gamble my money away. There's typically a positive function to that. And I know it's so confusing to think about, like, how is that helping anybody? But what these adaptations typically are designed to do is to create a feeling, an emotion, a body sensation, a narrative, a protection, right? An adrenaline rush to feel alive, to not feel depressed or miserable, right? To feel powerful. And so whenever I meet anybody that I work with, I'm really, really excited to meet all their adaptations, because those are the parts of them that we are going to really engage with in treatment, right? I mean, really, if you think about rebranding trauma therapy, we could just call it adaptation therapy, right? Because we're noticing all of our adaptations. And by the way, we all have them. We're understanding how they were created and why, like we're being compassionate about that. And then I do this really, really fun exercise with my clients. A lot of my clients are in leadership. And so I say to them, if you're the CEO of the company of you, right? If I'm the CEO of Kambria Evans, because I am, and I have all these adaptations working for me, how do I, as the CEO, manage this company, this organization that is me, right? Well, I have to understand, what are the job descriptions that are out there right now? And why did I write them, right? If I wrote a job description when I was 12 years old, that if I restrict my eating and if I have disordered eating, right, which allows me to stay a certain size in my body, which allows me to be accepted by society, right? That's a pretty sophisticated job description for a middle schooler to write, okay? So thinking about this from my CEO hat now as an adult, right? It's like, wait a minute, I'm the CEO. If I wrote that job description when I was 12 and that employee is working for me now 30 years later for free, right? Still showing up to restrict my eating, I want to be grateful to that employee. So loyal, so hardworking, fiercely protective of me, like committed. You don't fire someone like that. What do you do instead? You rewrite their job description, right? With the brain of someone who is an adult, right? And you appreciate all the service that they have provided to you as the CEO the last decades to fulfill that job description, right? I mean, whether we want to admit this or not, we wrote, consciously or unconsciously, we are so clever. We write these job descriptions for ourselves all the time in response to what we're learning and experiencing around us. It's what our body's designed to do, and it happens so fast. Sometimes we don't even notice that it's happening, right? Where we typically notice this is like after months or years of restricted eating or binge drinking or even oftentimes depression, like laying in bed is an adaptation. Because think about it. If you put yourself into a collapsed state of depression, right, you are in this like protective, shut down, like not available for stress or demands or requests. Like it's an adaptation in a lot of ways. And are there chemical, neurological, wiring, brain compositions, elements to all of this? 110%, okay? And today's episode is not going to be about more like neurodivergent brains or people who are like chemically, biologically inclined to have maybe more compulsive or impulsive behaviors, okay? This is not what that's about. What this is about is saying that if you're a clinician or you're a client and you have an adaptation like perfectionism, like restricted eating, like cutting, like shopping too much, or whatever it is, whatever the thing is that you're doing to help yourself, but also has consequences to it, right? Consequences to my perfectionism, consequences to my gambling compulsion. And the reason we have the compulsion oftentimes with behaviors is that it gives us something, or our brain thinks it's going to keep giving us something, right? So even though the consequences are happening, we still want to go for that initial positive feeling state. So if we put on the framework of understanding adaptations or addictions as what our body's designed to do, and that we're oftentimes deciding these adaptations and writing these job descriptions at a very young age when our brain isn't even fully developed or we don't even have resources or people helping us, it allows us to develop an understanding and compassion that then allows us to not come towards adaptations with judgment. I really want therapists and clients to put on the framework of, I will not judge adaptations. I will notice the consequences of them. I will be curious about being the CEO of myself. And I will take acknowledgement that at a young age, I wrote those job descriptions because that's the best I could do, right? I'll take responsibility for continuing to make that same choice. But when we come towards people punishing them for their adaptations in therapy, what we're doing is we're basically saying, you know, what you came up with at the age of 5 with perfectionism or at the age of 12 with restricted eating, those are bad things that you did. Those are bad behaviors, and we're going to get rid of them. And what we're telling somebody is, you didn't do it good enough. which I think discredits the age somebody was when they decided and created these things, which is actually very sophisticated for those ages. It creates more shame, right? Someone's already coming in to therapy about an adaptation that they feel is way overdeveloped and way out of control. They already have a ton of shame. You think, so many people have probably shamed them. They've shamed themselves, right? So any clinician that's shaming you for an adaptation or doing this, red flag in that therapeutic relationship. And if you as the clinician are doing this, I want you to zoom out. I want you to go to your own therapy, and I want you to think about what that is triggering in you, right? Compassion first with adaptations. And then once we understand that we can look at the adaptations without shame and without any judgment, then the creativity gets to happen, right? When we think about, okay, I wrote this job description when I was 12. Now at the age of 42, what do I want that committed employee to do for me instead? I want to change that job description. Instead of perfectionism, right? What do I want that energy to do for me? Because I know it's loyal. I know it's committed. It's always showing up for me working for free, right? The fact that you even have adaptations that have a positive intention, and they all do, by the way, even the ones that are confusing, like self-harm, tells you that a part of you fiercely loves, protects, and wants to help you, right? If we didn't have any adaptations, we just rolled over and we're like, anything can happen to me, right? I don't have any way to figure this out or survive this. Like that's full giving up, right? And those are very, very rare cases, right? And like we said, even full giving up, kind of surrendering in itself might be an adaptation, okay? So our minds are so sophisticated. They're so smart. I have so much respect for the fact that we can do this for ourselves. And so when someone comes in, I'm looking for their adaptations to meet them. Sometimes it's something subtle, like a client might say, am I doing this right? Or I'm feeling this. Am I supposed to be feeling this? Right? So I'm getting curious about a hypervigilant part of them that wants to make sure that what's happening is supposed to be happening and kind of making sure it's safe and that she's doing it correctly, right? If sometimes we internalize a self-monitor to do this so that we can protect ourselves from doing it wrong, which then might have led to criticism or shaming or abuse, right? So from the get-go, we can notice these in other people when they come and work with us. And maybe you're noticing them in yourself, right? So what's interesting to me is that oftentimes adaptations that appear to be healthy might actually feel out of control to us, right? I oftentimes get this question from people who say, I'm being told I'm a workaholic. And the way that I help people understand that message is I ask them something like, let's check out your adaptation system here. Okay. Now, if you are a workaholic and you have developed an adaptation to work a lot as a positive intention to, let's say, avoid feeling, being engaged in intimate relationships, staying in a place of competence at work where you get to constantly feel good, right? If that is an adaptation that you were creating whenever in the past, let's be curious about how that was developed. And let's be curious about the consequences of it, okay? And sometimes people might say, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm a workaholic and I'm doing it to numb myself out, or I'm doing it for these reasons. I do feel the consequences. I don't have any friends and I don't like that. Let's change it. That's not actually serving me. Let's rewrite the job description for something different, okay? But another thing that might happen when we kind of do this adaptation assessment is that we can also realize I'm being told I'm a workaholic because someone has an expectation of me that I'm not meeting. And because I don't trust myself yet, and because I don't have a strong sense of self yet. I'm now confused about what expectations I'm supposed to be meeting for this person or these people in my life. And sometimes people take this question and say, you know what? This is not an adaptation. This is actually me enjoying being in flow in my passionate career. And this is how I want to show up in my life. It doesn't feel overdeveloped. It doesn't feel like it has consequences that matter to me. It doesn't feel like it's controlling me, right? Because I know I'm the CEO and I know that if I want to stop working and go on a vacation, I can do that. But if I'm thinking about work on vacation, it's because maybe I truly love my job and I'm really good at it, right? So I think that oftentimes what happens with adaptations is that we can get manipulated by people who tell us things about ourselves that don't actually fit our internal experience, right? So there's a lot here. It's very complex, but I always try to have people come towards this with a sense of curiosity about themselves. What are you doing to help yourself? What are you doing to think about meeting someone else's expectations, right? I'll also notice that my clients will have a temporary adaptation given the circumstances. Sometimes these adaptations are not things we developed in childhood at all, right? And there was no better way to see this than during the pandemic, right? There was lots of people who didn't have childhood trauma or complex PTSD that were like, shit, I'm literally in the middle of a global meltdown and it's not safe and I'm scared, and all of that is an appropriate response and all of that is valid, proportionate to what's actually happening right now. There's so much uncertainty, right? And so when we are in a current place of survival for our lives, right, we develop all sorts of adaptations, right? I mean, during COVID, people went out and bought all the toilet paper, they bought guns, they bought food. Like, were those things proportionate or disproportionate? I'm not going to answer that. But what I will say is that survival instincts are real when we're kids, and survival instincts are real when we're adults, right? I was really curious as a therapist during the pandemic about adaptations, and I actually did a lot of qualitative applied research in my own family, with myself, around people's relationship with their adaptations during the pandemic, particularly around food. And I will be sharing the results of that with you as I put those things together and share some kind of clinical impressions that might be informative for people who are working with the adaptation around disordered eating and trauma and safety. So stay tuned for that. So if you're somebody who is going into therapy and you've been labeled as somebody who has an addiction, what I want you to understand is that your behavior to compulsively go towards something that gives you a positive feeling state is understandable, is actually trying to help you, but also has consequences. And what's so amazing is that there are so many different treatment modalities for adaptations or addictions, like AA and treatment centers. And what I love about being an EMDR clinician is that there are several protocols around disconnecting someone's compulsive behavior or addiction or adaptation, separating that from a positive feeling state they actually get or imagine they will get. Let me say that again. There are tons of EMDR protocols available that are so effective to help you de-link, right, a compulsive addiction or adaptation behavior from the brain's perception of getting a desired positive feeling state, right? Here's an example. If I go online and I buy a bunch of stuff on online shopping, right? I might actually get tons of benefits. I might have cute clothes. I might feel smart about getting deals. I'm giving myself tons of positive cognition. I might feel less alone, imagining myself in a future template state, wearing these cute clothes out with all my friends. Like, there's so many things the brain can do with shopping. It's very complex in terms of the positive cognitions that might come from having a shopping adaptation or shopping addiction, right? Now, I then have to ask myself, is this controlling me or am I in control? Is this overdeveloped? Does this have consequences I care about? Or am I just a shopper? And that's part of my identity that feels good for me, like I'm a hard worker, right? So these are questions that I think people need to ask themselves with their therapist without shame, without judgment, right? Because ultimately, if this is so out of control for someone and the consequences are so great, typically those will become obvious and apparent to that person at some point, right? People refer to that as kind of like a rock bottom. So if I decide I have a shopping compulsion, this is a behavior that no longer serves me or has more consequences than positive outcomes for me, I don't control it, then EMDR is amazing. It can actually take that behavior, identify what's the positive feeling state linked to this, or maybe there's several, and then we can use EMDR to de-link those things. Now, here's what's really important about adaptations. This is so important. And if you're someone working through this right now, I want you to hear this. It's not enough to just take it away. We can't just take away the adaptation because it's doing something for you. If you take it away, you've got to replace it with something, right? Think back to this analogy about the CEO writing job descriptions, right? Don't fire that worker. that worker is like working for you all the time, right? Rewrite the job description, replace the adaptation with something that you can feel good enough about, right? Sometimes when you go to AA meetings, people will be outside smoking cigarettes. And they're like, they'll sometimes say, not everybody, they'll sometimes say, I'm not drinking, I'm sober today. That's important to me because there was too many consequences from that. I didn't have control of it. And I am part of the replacement of that adaptation is smoking cigarettes. And I'm okay with that for now until I figure out another adaptation I feel better about, right? So there's these temporary adaptations that we can use. When we think about replacing an adaptation, I think that's where people can feel most powerful. When we think about rewriting a job description of an adaptation, that's where we can feel most creative. And I want you to know that saying these things, I think, sounds easier than doing them, than actually replacing them. And I want to again say that any brain-based modality like Brainspotting, EMDR, art, these are things that actually can help you install in your body, right, the positive linkages to actually use these things. It's much different than someone just kind of saying to you, like, don't drink anymore. You should go ride your bike, right? Like, you should be choosing the adaptation, right? Instead of perfectionism, you should be choosing what you want instead. When there's a hole there, when there's an absence there, that can feel scarier than, keeping it, right? Like an example, if one of my kids was biting their fingernails to self-soothe, which is a very kind of more acceptable adaptation people use for self-regulation, right? Or managing anxiety or managing energy in your body. I might be curious with them and say, you know what? I'm noticing you're biting your nails. How do you feel about that? And they might not care. And I might say, well, I'm kind of worried about germs and cold and flu season. I'm noticing that your fingernails are pretty bitten down and one of them's bleeding. And you deserve to have a body that's, not being hurt by yourself. And I'm just wondering if there's another way that you can get what you want with a different behavior, right? And so a lot of these EMDR protocols, once they de-link the compulsive behavior with the positive feeling state, they then link another behavior with the positive feeling state that feels chosen now, right? There's these things called jewelry that kids can buy, and they literally, it's like a necklace kids can chew on instead of biting their nails. We did not have this when I was growing up, right? But there's all sorts of healthier adaptations available to us. And it's that grace, that compassion, that curiosity to be curious about, what do you want to replace that with that you feel like you had power to choose, right? And then that gets generalized. Having the experience of knowing, like, I can choose my adaptations if the ones I decided on don't work for me anymore, that's real power. Because then we can change other adaptations that aren't working for us, right? And as we get older and as we learn more and more, because learning builds on itself, we relearn, we unlearn, we learn again, learn something new, see it a different way. Our adaptations should change, right? They should change. It's kind of silly to think that our adaptations would always be the same given how we're learning and evolving into our human adult brain. So I hope this helps those of you who are working with clients who have been labeled as having addiction issues. I hope this helps those of you who feel a compulsion inside of you and you feel shameful about it, or you feel confused about it and you're not sure what to do with it. And I hope this has helped a lot of clients and therapists have more productive, safer conversations about what's happening inside and the choices that we want to make to support what we want it to feel like inside instead. If any of this has been valuable to you, I would invite you to sign up for the Zero Disturbance mailing list. We love talking about all things learning, mental health, self-care, and well-being. We love thinking about the relationship between therapist and client to make that more effective, to have both clinician and client feel empowered in that space together. So I hope that you will join us in the Zero Disturbance community by signing up there. And it was so good to be with you and think through these things with you. I will look forward to being with you again soon. And in the meantime, please take good care.